Welcome to MoveConversations. This is an interview with Dr. Sven Hansen on the Global Resilience Report 2022. Dr. Hansen is the founder of the Resilience Institute, and for over 20 years, he has worked extensively in high-performance sports, professional firms, banks, corporates, government, entrepreneurship, universities, and schools. He has a degree in medicine and an MBA. Not a very common background, but very valuable to train people. With his background in sports medicine, he has set up an evidence-based, integral and practical solution to sustainable performance in life, in sports and business. Over 100,000 professionals have participated in the Resilience Institute training experiences. Welcome to MoveConversation, Dr. Hansen.
Good to be with you, Venkat. Thank you for the opportunity.
Pleasure is entirely ours. So let's start the conversation with what triggered you to conduct a resilience survey and compile this report?
Well, I'll answer that at a few levels. I think, one thing for many of your audience, business is serious, right? And if you're going to invest in something like resilience, you want to have some evidence that it's going to work. Right at the moment, there's an awful lot of resilience type solutions that are not based on evidence. So it has been our commitment from the very early days, in fact, from my days in sports medicine and executive medicine, if you're going to make a recommendation, you need to have good evidence. Otherwise, really, it's not scientific, and in terms of cost benefit, you can't claim very much. So right from the beginning, we've been committed to measurement. So the actual, we used to do health checks in the early days of the Resilience Institute back in the 2000s. But around about 2008, we thought we had to make this online. We had to give something as quick, simple, easy for large numbers of people around the world to answer. And, the power of that, of course, Venkat, is that if we can show an organization what their results look like, physically, emotionally, mentally, mental health risk, and then compare them with other similar organizations or industries, they can see exactly what their training needs are. That's a very powerful step. So for some organizations, they might want to focus on some of the more physical well-being. Others need to focus on, say, emotional intelligence. For others, it's more mental skills. So by having good evidence, you can really help a client choose the right solution. And of course, the last part of that is that we are really curious, not just to see, but to improve our ability to create change. So if you're going to measure how someone or a team is traveling, and you're going to do an intervention, you want to be able to answer the question, did this intervention work? So we've been doing that pretty consistently. This is our 6th major global report. And it's a really interesting one, I guess, because it records data through the COVID period, which has been quite an unusual time for many of us.
We'll come to that. You say in the report that resilience is not genetic or instinctive reaction. It is a learned response to adversity and challenge. But on your website, I also found an interesting statistic that European countries experience higher resilience ratios, and Asia is below the mean. So can you explain this finding to us? Don't Asians experience more adversity, more challenges?
Yeah, look, I think that's a complicated question. And relatively, even though we're talking about thousands of people, our samples are still quite small. So I think, scaling it up to global conclusions would be wrong. But we have seen, we work with similar countries across different territories. The scores in Asia most years have been slightly lower, particularly than Europe. The US is quite volatile. For example, right at the beginning of COVID, early 2020, the US scores were very low. But through COVID, and maybe with the change of election, we saw American resilience scores increase quite markedly. So yes, it's a fact. We see that. But remember, many things can drive that. So for some Southeast Asian countries, there's more humility
Right.
than, say, in a typical Californian company.
Mm, mm, mm.
So a Californian company, very loud, very noisy, and I'm this and all is great, whereas someone in a more conservative culture might be much more humble and cautious about how they answer the questions.
Oh, absolutely true.
So I think we need to respect that as well. On the positive side, and I was just looking at this with Manish, one of our team in Singapore recently. Right at the moment, we are getting our biggest growth from Southeast Asia. So a 35% improvement in resilience from pre to post.
Oh, okay.
Wow, that's more than Australia and New Zealand, where we traditionally, our business was based. So I think, that kind of proves the point. If you can bounce your resilience 35%, it's learnable.
Right. So one of the questions that I have is that, and it relates to your reference to COVID. You started this large scale study in 2018, but from 2020 onwards, we had COVID pandemic. So the adverse environment impacted people, and that's around the world, be it like you mentioned, America, Asia, and so on. So what did you find out about the resilience among people around the world in this period? You made a reference to Asian stats, but generally around the world.
So I think, this comment must be kept in mind that we are working with organizations who really care about their people. So many organizations through COVID simply stopped training. We work with those who maintained and even improved their training. So it is a self-selected sample. However, what we did find, and is crystal clear, is that despite what the media is telling us about how bad COVID was, the global resilience scores hit a low in the first quarter of 2020. But by the second quarter of 2020, they were already back up to where they had been previously. And in the 2 years since the COVID outbreak, resilience scores have actually remained quite high. It's a small amount, but it's a very measurable amount, Venkat. So it really is just for us a reminder for people in organizations, in business, to be careful about the media catastrophizing.
Oh, yeah.
And to keep in mind the fact that for most of all evolution, adversity has stimulated resilience. It's made us stronger.
Yeah, absolutely.
And we see in our data the same truth for COVID. It's in some ways, despite the terrible collateral damage, right? In some ways, it's made us stronger, more resilient.
Yeah. So then to develop that high resilience, what are the top 5 critical success factors?
Yeah, so it's one of the great questions in our work at the moment, and something we're really trying hard to work out. Of course, it varies a fair amount, and it varies year by year, which is fascinating. So the big change for this year's report, there were the 5 factors that we usually track. And what we're essentially trying to say is, if you look at a sample of 24,000 people, and you look at the bottom 10% and the top 10%, what are the differences? And what we found this time is that sleep was the #1 difference. Top 10% people are sorting their sleep out. Now, is that because sleep is more topical and there's much more in the media about sleep? Or is it because with remote work, managing your sleep has become a critical function? We think it's both. But it's a crystal clear message that sleep has shot up from under position 10 to position #1. So if you're going to be a successful person in today's world, get your sleep sorted. It's crystal clear. Second one is fulfillment. Right, so fulfillment is the sense of it's been a good day in a way. The kind of fulfillment we're looking for is you got something done. You achieved something, you've made some progress towards your goal. That has always been in the top 3. It remains in #2 position. Big surprise was bounce. Bounce shot up to position 3, as you can understand in COVID. 4th surprise, relaxation shot up. 5th surprise, focus, which has always been in the top 3, came in #5, and for interest for those who maybe fitness was #6. So, what it says is that, yes, you could go to university and say, what should I do? But our data is saying if you want to be in the top 10%, sleep well, find fulfillment in your role, bounce, relax, sort out your focus, sort out your fitness.
Wonderful. So let's take each one of them and spend a couple of minutes on them and understand them better. Over the last couple of decades, in fact, all the way from dot-com boom era and so on, the emphasis is on employees in startups as well as large firms to work day and night and launch new services, new products. If you're below the target, work on the quarterly target, not even like, half yearly or annual, but like quarterly. But you say in the report and also just now that a good night's sleep has been the number one factor that you're based on your research in promoting resilience. So what were your exact findings and what do we need to change our work culture?
All right. So sleep is a very big and complex topic. I think, to address your first point there, it is kind of tragic that we've had this culture of I'm a hero if I don't sleep.
True.
It's been a very poor signal because, and it's not just us saying this, it's hundreds of sleep experts. Any good sleep expert in the world is consistent on this point. If you don't meet your sleep needs, you are a vastly compromised version of yourself. Your physical health, down to inflammatory disease, heart disease, cancer, even the dementias, is massively increased if you don't sleep. Your emotional expressivity, your emotional control, your ability to read other people's emotions, empathy, is crushed if you don't sleep. And your mental skills are crushed. Even your ethics. People make much more questionable ethical decisions when they haven't had a good night's sleep. Right. So it just doesn't make sense to say don't sleep. It makes sense to say, yes, we need to work hard, but one of the things we're going to have to manage is sleep. And then the second part of your question, which I think, and let's do as quick as we can. There are probably three parts of sleep that each one of your audience wants to think about. The first question, which it was interesting, is in the media this week, is how much do you sleep? Right. So we know that the average adult is sleeping an hour less than they need. The average teenager, 2 hours less than they need. Right at the moment, the recommendation is around about 7 hours per day is what a human being needs. Now that varies from 6.5 to 8. A couple of studies are still saying more, but it's pretty clear that if you sleep too little or too much, you incur the same risk. So what you want to do is to work out what your body needs and get that amount of sleep or as close to it as you possibly can every night. And if you get thrown in a night, recover as quickly as you can, build it back. Second question is timing. And this is particularly important with our remote work. Human beings operate best when they go to bed at the same time and they wake up at the same time. So if you can find the right time for your sleep cycle to get to sleep and to wake up and keep that consistent, that's a big tick, maybe even more important than 7 hours. And the third one is quality. And that's tricky because many of us go to sleep with cell phones next to our bed and electric devices. And, it's a very polluted environment that we're living in. And what your body essentially needs to do is when you put your head in the pillow, you need to drop into deep sleep. Right. That deep sleep, 2 cycles, plus your dreaming sleep, which is 2 or 3 cycles, is essential to have the memory, to have the creativity, to have the emotional resilience and survive some of the trauma. So those 3 things: get your sleep need met, keep the timing right, get the quality right.
Wonderful. And it actually re-emphasizes when we started MoveConversations at the start of COVID, peak of COVID, in fact. So we actually had a sleep doctor who set up the first sleep institute in India up here, and we talked to him about it, and then he emphasized on these points, and then he elaborated and so on, and the challenge that he's facing with so many people missing out over the years, as well as during COVID time, and a lot of stress related. Wonderful. So the next we'll move on to is second you mentioned is fulfillment, right? Entrepreneurs, youngsters are often advised that like, hey, stay hungry, in your jobs, in your business. And you say that someone who is fulfilled is more positively engaged in their role, at work, in their business, and so on. So how is it that fulfillment ranks as a key strength when the normal, mantra is stay hungry? And
So, fulfillment is interesting. And over the 8 years we've been answering this question, it's always been in the top 3. So it's clearly a useful thing. Fulfillment, when we look at it, is not simply being content.
Okay.
You do need to be aspirational.
Okay.
And you need to be achieving some progress, traction. So we use that term flow. You might have heard the term of flow. There are times when you tackle a challenge and you've got the right skills and you get into this deep, involved state where you can really knock things off.
Correct.
When people in business achieve flow, the fulfillment is off the charts.
Shoots up, yeah.
And you don't need a lot. 30 minutes, 90 minutes a day is really enough to make you think, well, you know what? At least I got that done. So I think there's a big difference between contentment and just being relaxed or flatlined, if you like, and being aspirational and demanding flow in your life. And I think there's absolutely no question that fulfillment, and you could express it in different ways, but it's a sense of getting to the end of your day and thinking, you know what, that was a worthwhile day.
So does it help if people have smaller targets along the way and they feel that, hey, I have achieved this and that gives them fulfillment? Or is it, does it have to be a,
I think it's both
kind of a thing?
Venkat. I mean, I think you do need to achieve those little things, and I think that's really important. But you know what, and you certainly see this in the very aspirational entrepreneurial companies. They set big challenging goals.
Right.
And they really go for it. They go hard. And they're pushing for those flow jumps, if you like, of success. I think that's important too. So, the takeout we'd recommend is that everybody should try to structure 30 to 90 minutes of super productive work into each day.
Right.
The rest of the day, you can cruise around, manage relationships, do the control work, take it easy. But for that 90 minutes, you need to be intense and you need to be very aspirational. I think that's really important.
That's wonderful. So, the next one that you mentioned, bounce, does not come as a surprise in the context of resilience, right? Very often the two words are almost interchanged. But you mentioned that it's a learned skill. And, no doubt that it's a foundation of resilience. Tell us more about learning that skill to bounce back from adversity. And I think in that context, it's very relevant post-COVID.
Yeah, it really is. And it will continue to be in the world we're living in.
Sure.
I think when you look at, the challenges facing the globe at the moment, it's a very unsettling time, and the Ukraine situation is creating chaos for many people. There's going to be a lot of bounce required, let alone inflation and interest rates and things like that. So firstly, Venkat, we don't use the term bounce back.
Okay.
The reason for that, in the traditional definition, you can take an aircraft wing, you can bend it up, and it bounces back to its original position. But humans don't do that. If you or I go through a difficult period, we actually absorb it, we learn, we make adjustments. Even you think about the athlete, you send an athlete into a training session, it's hard work, right? They break down their muscles. The muscles don't grow back to where they were, they actually become stronger. Yeah. Same with our emotions, same with hard intellectual work. If you really work your brain to solve difficult maths problems, you increase the capability of that brain. It doesn't go back, it goes forward. So the idea of bounce is bounce forward fast. The second thing very, very important for people to understand is to reflect on their own tough experiences where they've had adversity and ask the question, did I learn something? And often if you have that conversation, you'll come and say, actually, that's true. That was very difficult at the time, but I really learned something. So we almost want to respect and treasure bounce. You know, when adversity strikes, this is an opportunity to be the best human you can be. It's difficult. And I think we need to say this with respect for the fact that, particularly for younger people, that bounce resilience factor is a little bit low. There are lots of young people struggling, particularly with anxiety, with depression, with the attention disorders, autism. They are much more common than they were in our generation.
True.
So for young people to understand how to bounce through some of the adversities of our time, it's actually mission critical. You know, for those of us who are parents, it's critical. It's the most important thing in your life.
True.
So to think about how we might, and I think this is the first point that most authorities, and remember we have a lot of research, 70 plus years of research on bounce. Children watch their parents. So, if you as a parent have a tough day at work and say, I might as well give up. Well, what's the lesson for the child?
Mm-hmm.
As compared to, gosh, mum had a tough day today. So here's what I'm going to do about it. So kids will learn a lot of those things from early on. They learn it from their peer groups. They learn it in school. So yeah, absolutely. We need to encourage and respect adversity, and we don't want to coddle our children too much. Now, that is a big concern in America, is that children have been overprotected.
Overprotected.
Yeah. So, there's an interesting balance, isn't there?
Yeah,
so we don't want our children to be hurt physically, emotionally, or mentally, but we do want them to have enough challenge that they actually have to say, how do I solve this problem? Instead of just walking away and crying or calling the police or whatever they might do. So it's definitely an interesting area to work on, and it requires modeling, it requires examples, and sometimes it requires really good support. So I think that is something for every organization needs to be conscious of today. There are some people in your organization who are a little bit down on that spiral. Right. They need help. So as a leader, one of the key messages for Bounce is you must pay attention to how your people are traveling. You don't have to be a psychiatrist, but you do have to listen. And at times I need to come and say to you, Venkat, look, I noticed you were really quiet in that meeting. Is everything okay?
Okay.
Zip it and listen to you. Right. And then maybe I need to say, well, look, why don't you go and talk to so-and-so, rather than pretending to be a psychologist. But I think that's very important for organizations now, as we are concerned about mental risk.
Absolutely. Yeah. So next on your list is relaxation, right? Not only in report, but I think in the last 2 years also, there's been a lot of talk about relaxation, and it's, but tell us how it is helping improve performance, because that's the context of your report.
So, all of these things are important, but I actually think in many ways right now, if I were to say to an organization, an individual, what's the one thing you could work on and master, I would say it's relaxation. The first thing you've got to do is you've got to define relaxation carefully, because it means very different things to different people. So we look at a couple of views in our questions. The first is just casual, relaxed relaxation. I go for a walk, I enjoy the nature, I take a coffee break with friends. That's not a formal process, but it's the starting point, because if we're going to work and be focused on this conversation together, it demands a lot of the brain. It's called task positive network. I can only give you my full attention for so long before the brain will switch into its default mode network. And I just simply don't hear you. I'm with my fairies, I'm daydreaming as you're talking to me. So we know that that's happening about 46% of the average professional's day. So don't assume that people are paying attention. They're not. So we know that for a fact. And what relaxation does is it allows the brain to have that rejuvenating rest mode so that it can come back strong. But you need to plan it, don't you? Because if your brain just goes offline while you're having the conversation, you'd be in big trouble. Productivity is a mess. And this is a problem with people playing with their phones, is the brain never has a chance to relax. It's just on, 2,617 times a day. It's ridiculous.
Right.
So simple relaxation is just stepping back from your screen, even creating some space, looking out at the sky, for example. Even that's important for your eyes, but it's a very important thing for the brain. Second part of it is we call tactical calm. The ability is, let's say we have a very difficult situation, a difficult argument or something, and people are getting angry and shouting at you. Can you, in that intense moment, just calm yourself so that you can remain rational, connected, engaged, empathic? Third part is what we would term contemplation, which could include mindfulness, meditation, prayer, any more detailed, sophisticated response. And then, bounce is another part of relaxation. So those four things we think are worth looking at. And I suspect that every single human being today could do more relaxation, and our brains would come back so much stronger. There's a beautiful book, by the way, I strongly recommend it. Came out early this year, called Stolen Focus. Stolen Focus by Johann Hari. It is an excellent read on how we have destroyed our productivity and our happiness by just being always on and not making time for relaxation. So practically, what does that mean? I think for each of us, there's probably a need to spend 5 to 8 minutes relaxing every single day, where you deliberately away from your devices, sitting, breathing calmly, just being super peaceful. 5 to 8 minutes. Second thing is that each of us needs to ask the question, what's my optimal attention span? So if we're going to talk for an hour, I got to ask the question, can I stay with you for an hour? Because many people can't. They will have turned off their screen, they're fiddling with their phone, they're having a look at an email, they're gone. Right. So you need to
teach in the university, and to keep attention of 50 people in a class is a completely different thing, right? And
we know that
can't
with adults,
give them the kind of feedback, like you mentioned, they check phones or electronic devices, the kind of instant gratification and feedback they give, a human can't give, right?
Correct. I mean, part of this is why this topic of resilience is so important, because these devices are very addictive. They're as serious as opioids or cocaine. Because the dopamine is just demanding it. So for each of us to understand what is my attention span, and to make sure that if you are going to be on for an hour, that you take what's needed for the rest to happen, so that you can dial in for the next piece of work. That is what we call rhythm. And I think that is the key to the relaxation idea. It's not too much, but it's the rest period that allows the brain to recalibrate, rejuvenate, and to come back strong. Lots of ways to do it.
Wonderful. So, and the objective of all of these, as you mentioned earlier, is focus, right? Then the question comes up, how do we not only develop it, but how do we sustain the focus?
It's actually it's a relatively simple answer, Venkat. I mean, it's just like if I keep working a muscle, that muscle will get stronger.
Right.
So if I identify my phone and I put it down there and I focus on you, I'm building mental focus. Every time I look at my phone, I'm losing mental focus. It gets weaker. So we know that the average teenager is switching attention every 19 seconds.
Wow.
That's very frightening.
Seconds. Wow.
So how do you learn? How do you get into deep work or flow if your brain is shifting? So, what we've got to be able to do is, one, have enough rest to fill the tank. Two, then we've got to be able to use the tank and really build strong, intense focus. So whether you do that when you read a book, whether you write a proposal, whether you're engaging in a conversation, empathizing with someone, there are many ways to build focus, but you need to be deliberate. You really need to be deliberate, almost like an athlete. Wow. And this is where, a traditional meditation practice is very powerful. I think people underestimate how hard it is.
Mhm.
But for those people who do have a daily meditation practice over the years, their capacity to focus with deliberate intensity and to hold that focus is massively enhanced. I mean, as the brain scientists would call them, they are the Olympic athletes of the brain.
Wow.
Yeah, I think we need
Yeah.
to build that more into our society. And, you know, because we want the phone, right? I need all the service it gives me,
Yeah.
but I don't want it to control my life. And
Exactly. That's the
what you're talking about, building focus, is building that deliberate attention. I'm going to solve this problem. I'm going to be with this conversation 100%.
right. You also mentioned that resilience increases with age, but then why does it peak at 40?
Yeah, interesting question. So, you know, of course, there are, every organization is different. Some people move you on when you get to 45.
Right.
I mean, the actual study, although the number of people working at older age groups decreases quite markedly, the resilience scores continue to improve until 70.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so right at the moment, when we look at the curve of resilience amongst people under 30, it is a source of concern. They're much lower, 20%, no more. So it's nearly 25% lower than someone in their 40s. So it definitely increases, and the state of play, so the pre-assessment data tells us that resilience continues to improve until about 70, and then drops off very slightly due to some of the physical needs.
Right.
What I think you may be referring to is the growth.
Yeah.
So the growth in resilience peaks in the 30s, 40s.
Okay.
Okay, so, and you know, that may be that you've hit a sense of maturity in your career, perhaps you've sorted out kids and so on. You can start to focus on yourself. But you're absolutely right in that, when you get into that 40-year-old zone, resilience grows, I think it's like 27% across our programs.
Right.
Whereas it grows slightly slower amongst young people and slightly less among older people.
Right. So that would mean, does that imply that like resilience training that you provide helps in healthy aging? So can older people remain active and engaged in work with resilience training?
Yeah, it's a neat observation, because, one of the things we're wrestling with at the moment is it's really hard to find good people for jobs.
Mm-hmm.
So that means we need to bring young people on board, and we need them to be resilient. So, helping young people build their resilience to deliver the work, that's going to be important. But another way to solve the problem is to keep your old people healthier and more able to work. So, when we look at the top gains that our programs achieve across thousands of people, it's all the healthy aging criteria. People really get bang for their buck. So yes, I'd be extremely optimistic that I think one of the things we will see, and we've already seen it, to be honest, is, you look at the Buffett's story, these guys, Charlie and Warren Buffett, are working in their 90s.
Yeah.
And they're doing incredible work. Well, there's a lesson for all of us, isn't it? Maybe if we find out how to generate the optimal resilience, we'll be able to work longer and still get that fulfillment, which clearly they do in their 90s. I mean, it's wonderful, isn't it?
Yeah. So, but they haven't revealed, Buffett and Munger have not revealed anything other than Dairy Queen ice cream and Coke. What are the other secrets that they
It is a
have?
worry, that, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. So they're not telling.
But
So someday we will find out.
well, I think you have found out, what they are very focused individuals.
Yeah, absolutely.
They're very
Absolutely.
disciplined with their attention.
Yes.
I think you can also
Daily
say
routines.
that their emotional control is excellent.
Yeah.
And their communication skills, that empathy and social awareness, it's just great. So yes, and just by the way, when we look at our data, nutrition is actually one of the least important factors between being in the top 10% and the bottom 10%. So we go through this, what we should ask.
Can you put it in the top of the next report so that those of us who have been bombarded? I'm just kidding.
Well, I think that's true, because it's important to eat well, of course.
Right,
but it's not nearly as important as your sleep, as your fulfillment, as your focus and your bounce.
Exactly. And I get the context. I was just saying in lighter way. So apart from these 5 factors, you also talk about an interesting thing. It's about connection related factors, which help in building resilience. So what are these? And in the last couple of years, especially when people have been like working from home, Zoom meetings at the most and so on, our ability to connect has been affected. So how are people going to
Indeed.
connect? And then this is generally even from a social personal context, but if you take it from a business corporation context, how was our ability to connect and lead affected? And then what are those factors, the connection related factors that we need to stay alert to build resilience?
It's a complex question to answer
Sure.
that, right?
Sure.
So, here's one thing we can say straight away with lots of confidence. Certainly through 2020 and most of 2021, consistent message from senior leaders around the world is that they were finding connecting through Zoom calls absolutely exhausting.
Mm-hmm.
Many of them were going from one call to the next, 11, 12, right. 13 calls per day. As we talked about focus, you simply can't do that. So the quality of your call declines through the day.
Right.
So we know that virtual communication is very challenging for the brain. So for many of us who are reconnecting face to face, it almost feels like a relief.
Right.
It's joyous. It's a really important thing, and whatever we emerge into in the future, it will probably be some sort of hybrid. We should never forget the power of face-to-face connection. Right. So let's start on that and think, well, what is connection? Connection is first and foremost the ability to be self-aware.
Right.
So if I cannot tell that I'm getting frustrated or angry, I've got no chance of managing myself. Right. So you have to be able to see yourself and to be able to, Sven, look, you're getting frustrated here. Just then I can say I can calm, but I can't see it. I can't do anything. Self-awareness is very important. The second one is the ability to control your emotions. If we lose our emotions, we will distance people. And I think this is really one of the wrestles that the American political system had with the 2020. People lost their emotions, storming the Capitol Hill. It's ridiculous. That's emotional, is loss of control. And the third part of connection is the empathy. The ability to really read someone else, see their needs, and then influence, work with them more skillfully. Right. Now, if you look at those 3 things, self-awareness, self-regulation, and empathy, that to me will be the inflection point, the crucible through which we as humans need to go through to have a sane future. Right. If we fail on these connection factors, the planet will fail, humanity will fail, life itself will fail. So when you see some of the conflict happening around the world, that's not respecting self-awareness, emotion regulation, and empathy. It's a violation
of that.
All right. So I think, when we think about this in the business sense, we are beginning to see from the concept of emotional intelligence that the payback is massive. So if you look at what puts a leader in the star leadership performance category, 85% of that is emotional intelligence, which is self-awareness, self-regulation, empathy. Now, from our own work, and this is for many of our programs, they've really had to focus on well-being and supporting people through difficult times. So we know we can have a really powerful effect on bounce. We have a very powerful effect on that relaxation, mastering pressure concept, and we have a really great effect on physical well-being. But our impact on emotional intelligence is still, in my view anyway, suboptimal. And I think the reason is you need to get your bounce, you need to get your calm, you need to get your physical well-being sorted out before you can really dial on to emotions. So, if someone is depressed or they're anxious, they're their ability to show that emotional intelligence in the workplace is going to be very limited. If you have a bad night's sleep, it's gone. So, in many ways, I think the encouragement to organizational leaders is to say, if your people are well, you will be able to get these emotional intelligence factors playing out. Now, all of them, the self-awareness, the self-regulation, influencing skills, empathy, they all increase in our programs, and we're very proud of that. But to be honest, we'd like to see that grow from 10, 15% to 25, 30%. We'd like to double our impact there. I think that's what the world needs.
That's a wonderful closing thoughts on resilience and what kind of training not only the employees need, but also leaders need to be aware of how to train their people and what to observe. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for spending time with us and explaining your research. I'm sure we would at a future date we could come back to you, and there's a lot of ground still to be covered, but we got a good overview of it.
Yes,
we could
and I think that's
specific topics. Yeah. Sorry,
it's going to grow for many years hence. We're still at the very early days of understanding it.
Right. And then maybe in some subsequent sessions we could pick one of these themes and then discuss in greater detail.
Fantastic.
Thank you so much.
It's been a pleasure to talk. Appreciate the time.
Thank you for joining us in yet another episode of MoveConversations. Hope you enjoyed this episode. Please subscribe to the MoveConversations YouTube channel and press the bell icon to get notifications of new episodes. Thank you very much. Till I see you in the next episode. Thank you very much. Have a great day.